Good morning, everyone. I am not Dr. Cheryl Leonard. Dr. Cheryl Leonard is in traffic right now. And you would think
Wake
that
County graduations have begun.
you would think that Governor's Highway Safety would have a clear route, but she's in traffic. And Chad Ahoron is visiting a school this morning with his daughter. So anyway, but good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the May 21st, 2024 quarterly meeting of the North Carolina Driver Education Advisory Committee, or the DEAC. This is a legislatively required committee and is outlined in North Carolina Strategic Plan and the State Board of Education policy. Again, I'm not Dr. Cheryl Leonard, but I have Carl Logan. I'm with DPI staff, and I call this meeting to order. And we will operate with me in this position until Dr. Leonard gets here. So anyway, we move forward here. But that's why I thank you for your indulgence here. We have a great meeting scheduled today, and I'm excited, and I know that you will be by the end of the meeting. What I'd like to do here is I want to welcome the committee members who are here and online, and also a huge welcome to the on-site visitors and also the online listeners. It's always great to have tech folks.
Cool.
So now we got the echo. Should we? Yeah.
Okay.
Good. All right. Please be reminded that this meeting shall comply with public meeting laws, including the use of Robert's Rules for Administration. Our agenda and materials are available online through the DPI website and on the driver education section page. The meeting is also audio streamed through WebEx that you're listening to now, and it's noted at the bottom of the advisory committee page as well. Please be advised that the meeting will be recorded and will be made available via YouTube as soon as possible. Is that correct, Cindy? Being that I was not planning to be the one that was opening the meeting, I don't have any opening remarks other than the fact that we are in a critical time and an inflection point in this program, and it's the meeting that we've got scheduled today hopefully will shed more light on the issues at hand to the attendees. At this time, what I would like to do is recognize an individual here who has served 2 terms, 4 years as a member of this committee and has provided leadership as a former principal and is currently the owner of A+ Driving School in Wayne County. Mr. Craig Uzel will be rotating off of the advisory committee. Unfortunately, after 4 years, you provided a lot of insight, a lot of leadership. Thank you for that. Would you like to say anything?
Thank you. I've enjoyed it. I've enjoyed coming up here and listening and keeping updated with driver's ed and helping any way I can.
Well, certainly we would like to invite you to stay connected. We have a long associates list to the advisory committee, and that hope that you would be able to continue to share and come and visit and sit at the table here with us as well. But you will be missed, and so I do appreciate the communications that we've had over the years.
Thank you.
All right. Also rotating off after his first term as a student representative is Owen Dara. I'm not so sure if he is on. Cindy, if you could look through there. I have not had any communication with him. He probably graduating this year, but but we will communicate with him because legally he does have another term that he could serve as a student representative. We wish him the very best. I look forward to talking with him very soon. But we do thank him for his participation as well. Students are obviously at the core of driver education, and that their insight and obviously helps us to plan the program as we move forward. I will now read the ethics statement Committee members are reminded that it is our duty to avoid conflict of interest and appearance of conflict of interest as we handle the work of this committee. Does anyone of the committee know of any conflict of interest or any appearance of conflict with respect to any matters coming before this meeting? If so, please state them for the record, and or if during the course of the meeting you become aware of an actual or apparent conflict of interest, please bring the matter to the attention of the chair, the acting chair in this situation. It will then be your duty to abstain from participating in the discussion on the matter from voting on that matter. The purpose of this meeting shall be to advise and make recommendations to the State Board of Education through the Department of Public Instruction on the implementation of the North Carolina Driver Education Strategic Plan and other issues related to driver education and safety. Our mission, composed of experienced and diverse perspectives, the Driver Education Advisory Committee provides research-based information and recommendations to the State Board of Education to implement and maintain the strategic plan. The advisory committee advocates for certified professional teachers, high-quality instruction, up-to-date curricula to prepare each student to be informed and a responsible driver. By now, the members should have had an opportunity to review the minutes from the February meeting and today's agenda. The floor will entertain a motion to accept the minutes from the February 2024 meeting. Do I have a motion? Motion by Devin Tanner.
I'll second the motion. Eddie Jordan.
The floor will entertain a motion to accept today's agenda. One little piece, even though I'm the one who typed it up, I'm going to, without objection from anyone, there is a old business section. What I want to do is, in light of the 3 presentations that we have today, I'm going to squeeze the old business into the DPI update unless anyone else has anything else to add. So without that, without any objections from the membership, we will do that. So do we have a motion to accept today's agenda?
Motion.
Devin Tanner. Second.
I'll second it.
Second, Eddie Jordan.
Ms. Taylor, would you call the roll and record the vote?
Yes, please answer present during roll call if agree to approve both the minutes and accept today's agenda. Dr. Cheryl Leonard. Eddie Jordan.
Present, and I accept the minutes.
Present. And accept.
Dr. Brandy Gill.
Present and accept both agendas.
Kevin Harrison.
Present and accept both agendas.
Sherry Vernelson.
Present and accept both agendas.
Alden Williams.
It's Terry Fuller.
Okay. Gary Fuller. Daniel Carter.
Present and accept.
Connor Faulkner. Devin Tanner.
Present and accept.
Marsha Kelly. Bobby Dixon.
Present and accept.
Lieutenant Kinley Russell. Chad Aharon. Asim McGill. Devin Curling.
That should be Justin Owens.
Justin
Yes.
Owens.
Yep, this is Justin Owens, present and accept.
Gotcha, thank you. Ella Hatcher. Ebony Baker. And Owen Dara.
Ebony Baker, present.
Hear that? That was Ebony Baker. Yep.
All right, Mr. Living, you do have a forum.
Do have a quorum. Thank you, Cindy. Next would be the DPI update. My efforts are to keep from talking. It looks like I'm going to be doing most of the talking here, so we'll move right into the DPI update. As I said before in the brief opening remarks, the program is at an inflection point in the history of the program, which is very fast, quickly moving toward 100 years of age, believe it or not. This program began in 1927. What was it like back then, Jeff?
I don't know, you were babysitting me, so I don't know.
Oh, yeah, it was tough. So the program is quickly approaching 100 years old. I'm going to quickly go through a few things. I'd like to save as much time for the three presentations that I have today that we've asked folks to come forward and present, which I think will provide you with a tremendous amount of information on a special populations of students that we serve. There have been 4 times in our recent history that I can think of, beginning in 1992, 2009, I believe, 2015, and then during COVID or during the pandemic when the program ceased to operate for a brief period of time. Each one of those times, it produced a tremendous backlog of students, which we are now recovering from the pandemic. Some of the presentations that we are going to have today will reflect some of the issues that we are going through at this point. Most of you know by now that we had the budget bill last fall eliminated the administrative funding for the program, which basically will exacerbate the current situation because we're going to have fewer and fewer teachers who are retiring simply because of obviously age, but there's no way to replace those teachers because the teacher certification program was being funded out of those administrative funds. DMV, unfortunately, does not have the capability of absorbing that need. So that being said, the General Assembly asked us to come over, DPI asked us to come over in December to come and meet with them. On January 11th, we had a good meeting. We believe that there was positive movement toward a technical correction to reverse this. Then I was asked by another legislator to meet with them. I thought we had a good meeting there. And I'm speeding through a few things here to get to the point. I was also met with the North Carolina Driving Traffic Safety Education Association. It was delightful to see everyone at the meeting. However, I was met with some information or different information that we were used to, that we have been disseminating from the agency, which I hope has not caused any of the misinformation may have gotten to the General Assembly. I was quite concerned that some of the questions that were asked by the legislators was things that we felt like that were way behind us in the rearview mirror, but it was not. And at this recent conference, a lot of the same information had surfaced there. And so my concern is the information that's being shared outside of the agency, whereas, I guess I should back up a second. The state superintendent of public instruction is responsible for administering the program. Here is where all of the facts lie regarding the program itself, the data and the instruction, but the information that's being shared wasn't quite accurate, which I'm hoping that's not what swayed the legislators in making these decisions. Moving forward, what I'd like to do here is roll into, Cindy, can you go to the next slide? Are you still in there?
This one?
Yes, and I actually skipped right over that. Go to the data. Some critical data that we're following. Some critical data that we're following is, you'll see on the left-hand side of this slide is the blue column shows the approximate number of students that we have currently, about 140,000 eligible students for the program. In 2019, just before the pandemic, you can see that year we had a tremendous decrease in the number of students that we served. The orange would be the classroom phase, the green would be the behind the wheel phase. And then in 2020, 21, we started recovering slightly, and then we moved forward. We moved forward in 21, 22, a little bit more, and 22, 23, we had the most students since the pandemic, which now, if we're following the data, we're in the third quarter and the fourth column there, or the fifth column, the 23, 24 column. This column is critical because this is right now in the third quarter. We would hope that there would be another increase in the total number of students that we're serving. But if this does not at least equal out, we'll start to see I'm afraid that we're seeing a decrease in the number of students that we're serving, which could be an indicator that we have a fewer number of teachers in the field. So these are numbers that we will consider or continue to monitor as we move forward. Do we have any questions from anyone, comments, Ms. McCarroll?
What's BTW?
BTW is behind the wheel.
Ah,
It's a little internal jargon there.
so the real drive, like the actual driving.
Yeah, the actual driving phase. So actually, driver education really is, we think of them as two different students. You've got the classroom phase and then the driving phase. There is no requirement in the public schools for the students to finish the classroom phase before they start driving. Okay. All right. Are there any questions?
The meeting got muted, it sounds like. Everything here is good.
Are we?
This is Sherry Vernelson. I can hear you just fine online.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, Sherry. Any questions on the data? That's obviously that's a brief amount of data, but yes.
The blue bar on the left side of the patient's ATM, what is that again? Is there a
The
reason?
blue bar is the maximum number of students, the maximum estimate that we have for total students, public, private, charter, home, and federal school students.
And is that across?
So that's
all
across,
5 years?
that's the whole state. That's the whole state, what we're dealing with. The whole state is about 140,000 students.
Is that just for 2019-20 or?
Yeah,
is
that's on an average.
Okay.
That's on average. But just below that, because some students, a lot of students don't take the program or wait until they're over 18 before they take the program. So we had gathered enough information to determine that 80% of those 140,000 is about 120,000 students. That's normally our bar. That's what we shoot for. And you can see what we're during the pandemic, we were obviously below that, and we slowly started inching back toward 120,000. Good question. No questions. All right, Cindy, and because I got ahead of myself, can you go back a couple slides. I skipped over the DEAC administration. Very quickly, just because it's the end of the year, what I want to do is I want to cover the fact that we mentioned already that we've got one member that will be rotating off, but my sheet here it is. I can't see the screen. Some of you have a handout here in the room. You can see that on the screen. Department of Public Instruction has 3 members on the committee. Dr. Brandy Gill, you're in your first year, so you rotate off in 2026. Thank you for being here. Sherry Vernelson, 2025. Kevin Harrison, I have not talked to you, but since you're right here at the table, you could make a public statement, or we can talk in private if you would like to continue on another term.
Sure. Happy to continue.
Oh, so we can move that out to 2026. You heard it here, folks. First, folks. Heard it here,
Way to
folks.
pin him down in public.
Oh, yeah, right.
I talked to Eddie Jordan recently. He is going to continue on. Thanks, Eddie. And Asim McGill has accepted another 2-year term. And Chad has also accepted a 2-year term. So we will be going to the State Board of Education with 2 nominees this time. As a quick review, the agency appointed districts or agency appointed seats do not have a term limit, and they merely are here at the pleasure of their agency. And in essence, if they're going to be absent, basically they just have to call us and let us know who's going to take their place, and that's worked out great for us. So anyway, does anybody have any questions about the EAC membership? All right, very good. Moving forward. Going back forward there, Cindy. So at this time, because of the nature of the questions that I've been receiving over the past year or 2, and then also recently at the conference, I've approached some members here at the table to provide a little bit of insight for us, a little bit of insight onto their group of students. The first presenter is Sherry Vernelson. She's a section chief here at Department of Public Instruction, and with exceptional children. I had an opportunity to sit in on her session at the recent conference, and it was just, I've known about the program, or I'm very familiar with the program, but I didn't know a lot of things that she was sharing. So I'm sure that the folks here at the table will, and all those of you who are local membership will have an opportunity to hear firsthand of how to assist exceptional children through the driver education process. Sherry, thank you for being here.
You're welcome. Thank you for inviting me to speak. As Carl said, I am Sherry Vernelson. I'm the section chief for the sensory support and assistive technology section within the Office of Exceptional Children, and I oversee the low incidence disability areas of vision impairment, deaf and hard of hearing, deaf blind, and then assistive technology for all disability areas. So it is good to be with you today. I'm sorry I can't be there in person, but thankful for these virtual mechanisms to be able to join the meeting. So as we move on, I just wanted to open my video to get you to put the face with the name, and I'm going to turn it off to help save on some bandwidth and be able to focus on the presentation. And then I'll turn it on if there's any questions later. So you can go to the next slide, Cindy. There we go. So I put Tom Cruise on there because first of all, I just want to say thank you to all of the driver education instructors. Driver education instructors are kind of like Tom Cruise to me. As you may know, if you're a Tom Cruise fan, that Tom Cruise does all of his, or most all of his own stunts in movies. thereby sacrificing his body and potentially his life. And that's what I think you all do on a regular basis. You potentially sacrifice your life by getting in that passenger seat with a novice driver behind the wheel, and you don't even think twice about it. Or maybe you do sometimes. But I'm sure you all can tell some stories. But thank you so much for being that person who lives out element number 6 of the State Board Drive 004 policy, which is transferring knowledge, developing skills, and influencing the attitudes and behaviors of a novice teen driver so they can perform as a safe and competent driver in the graduated driver license program here in North Carolina. So thank you so much. And now on to the presentation. So Carl asked me to share some demographics, and I did share this at the Driver Traffic and Education, I'm never going to get the name right, of that association conference back in April. And there's some updated data as well. But just in terms of driver education enrollment, these are the numbers starting in 2020, where the number of students with an IEP or a Section 504 plan were enrolled in driver education. So as you can see, the numbers have steadily increased over the years with the current data that Carl provided me, which really we just had the third quarter, up to the third quarter data, which was 2,317 students with a disability enrolled in driver education. And you can go to the next slide.
Hold on 1 second.
Yeah, sure.
They're working with the tech issues in the room. Cindy, can you go
Okay.
to the next slide?
Yep,
Oh,
there we
okay.
go. That's
Sorry.
it. And so students, this is a looking at our December child count. So in special education, so every December 1st and April 1st, there is a child count of students with disabilities. And the April numbers are not quite ready yet. So this is the December. This is the trends over time of our December head counts. And so it just really confirms that the number of students with disabilities is steadily increasing in North Carolina. Now, this is just for students with IEPs. I don't have the numbers of students or trends of students with 504 plans, but my assumption would be that they have also increased over time. And you can go to the next, there we go. So this data then just shows the total number of students with disabilities from December 2023, ages 3 to 21 was 213,049 students. So that just kind of gives you an idea of the number of students identified with as eligible for special education and related services and have an IEP. Again, I don't have those specific numbers for students with 504 plans. But then the number that I thought you would likely be very interested in was the next number, which is those students with an IEP ages 14 through 17. Those are the students that may be enrolled in driver education. And that number is 56,702. Then this next little bit of data that Carl provided for me, and Carl, feel free to jump in if you have any clarifications to make about these sets of data. But the number of districts who had students with an IEP or 504 plan enrolled in driver education in 23-24 was 66. And some of you may be thinking, well, that's low because we have 115 traditional districts and many more charters. So Carl, if you have any insights into that data, please feel free to share. then students, again, that third quarter data of students who were actually enrolled in driver education with an IEP or 504 plan was that 2,300 number. The number of districts who of students with disabilities who completed some or all of driver education was 64. And then the number of students actually completing driver education that had an IEP or 504 plan was 1,517 students. Yep, so you can go to the next slide. There we go. I thought this might be interesting data to you. So that same December child count data broken down by disability category. And so you can see that specific learning disability is certainly the highest eligibility area that we have in North Carolina, followed by other health impairment, and then followed by autism. Those are sort of the top three disability category areas, a primary eligibility area. Autism is certainly the fastest, or pretty sure it's the fastest growing disability area. And just to give you an idea of what I mean by that, so in 2000, 6 out of 1,000 children were diagnosed. In 2020, it was 1 in 150. And now in 2023, it's 1 in 36 children are diagnosed with autism. So, and it's more prevalent in boys than girls. So just, I think that's interesting data, just so that you know the types of children or students that may be enrolling in driver's education. And certainly all of these areas, there's a spectrum, if you will, of, sort of mild to more severe. But it is very possible that you could have a student with one of these disability areas in your driver's education class. You can go to the next slide. Yep. And then another interesting piece of information, and this came from the most recent information was from the 22-23 end of course testing accommodations. And I just used end of course because that end of course are the students. Those are the tests that they're taking, in high school, not the EOGs, end of grades, but the end of course. And so these are the students that are potentially going to be in your class. So these are the most frequently used or requested accommodations on the end of course tests. And so you very well may see these accommodations being requested in a driver's education course. And then the red box around extended time, read aloud, and testing in a separate room were the most common testing accommodations that were utilized on end of course assessments. And then these requested accommodations were for all students, not just students with disabilities. So there are some accommodations that are just universal and anybody can have that accommodation. And so the link, if you were provided a copy of this presentation, and so that hyperlink there at the top will take you to what's called the Green Book, where you can find, that's where I got this data from. Okay. So this,
Sherry,
yes.
can I ask you a question?
Yes. Sure.
Legally, are the schools required to give more or provide more accommodations than they would receive at the driver license office?
So,
Meaning that this
That's
is
a-
not a required,
right. I mean, it's a great question. And, I think the, I think you have to look at every situation individually, right? And sort of knowing like, is this student, are they potentially just completing the classroom portion and they may not go on to complete the driver portion? But we might want them to have, the information in there. So, you know, I would say, in that regard, if we know that they may only be completing the classroom portion, then can we provide that for them so they get the best information and it's accessible to them? In terms of, the driving component, probably not. But I think you always have to just, because you never know legally what's going to happen or what somebody might, come back with. We're going to talk in just a little bit about potentially undue hardship and what that means and sort of if a district denies an accommodation to a student and what that could mean. So it's just always something to think about.
Let me ask you a question. All right, the public, we have to offer the accommodations, but kind of like what Carl said, when they go to DMV, what is their requirements? Because we have a lot of kids that can pass driver's ed, but does DMV have to do accommodations, read aloud, testing in a separate room? What are their requirements? Because
So yeah, so they're all, and as I go through this with the requirement is really is ADA. That's the federal, the
Right.
federal law. And so if part of it comes back to um that undue hardship. So if an agency and there's different parts of the ADA that apply to different components of society. So there's like, I think it's Title II that it's either Title II or Title III that applies to like state government, right? So, as a person with a disability and under the ADA, it's a right. It's broader than IDEA. IDEA is, what we look at for IEPs and for students in school, and ADA is looking much broader. And so, the if someone requests an accommodation, and I believe currently that there may be certain accommodations that the DMV provides, and then they may say, no, we don't, we're not going to provide this, and somebody comes back and says, well, maybe they sue, the agency would have to defend themselves in, this was an undue burden or this was an undue hardship for us. Because if we provide this for one, we got to provide it for all, and it which could place an undue burden or hardship, financially on them. So we're going to get into that in just a little bit more here in a second. So this was a question that was posed by Mr. Mike Jones to me when I was presenting at the conference in April, just around what is our legal responsibility to serve students with disabilities. So you can go to the next slide. So in North Carolina, we have three areas under state law and at policy, as well as federal law. So the North Carolina General Statute, our State Board of Education policy, and then the ADA, or the Americans with Disabilities Act. And you can go to the next slide. So the the general statute, and I've kind of highlighted some of the key words there in terms of the administration of a driver's education program. It says the program should be offered to all physically and mentally qualified persons, of course, who are older than that 14 years, 6 months, are approved by the principal of the school, are enrolled in public or private high school within the state, or are receiving instruction through a homeschool, and who have not previously enrolled in the program. Then if we go to the next slide, that highlights our State Board of Education policy. And then the first bullet there really talks about the student criteria, which is established by what we just looked at in the general statute. That classroom and behind the wheel instruction are available to all qualified students within the boundaries of their LEA. They're provided classroom instruction according to the state guidelines, including, and I highlighted, appropriate opportunities for all students. And then reasonable accommodations may be considered on a case-by-case basis under the ADA, with also considerations be given to an IEP or a 504 plan. The next slide talks a little bit more about the ADA and what the qualifications are there. So it's definitely, as I said earlier, broader. So it can be someone who has a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more of the major life activities. They have a history or record of an impairment, or are perceived by others to have an impairment. And if a person falls into any one of those categories, the ADA does protect them. I will say bullets 2 and 3 there about the history or the perception. You really dig into those a little more, which, I don't have time to do that here. But there are some special provisions around that. So really sort of that bullet 1 is kind of what we're going to be talking about today. And so then what does all this mean, or what does this mean for driver education programs? And that just really may mean that, the district may have to make a reasonable accommodation for the student. So if we go to the next slide, this is where it talks around Title II. And really that second bullet and those bolded words there, where Title II requires the state and local governments to give people with disabilities an equal opportunity to benefit from all of the programs and services and activities that they offer, including public education and those other areas. So if you go to the next slide. So here are just some things that Title II requires of state and local governments. And really that third bullet around making those reasonable accommodations to policies, practices, and procedures in order to avoid discrimination, unless they can demonstrate would fundamentally alter the nature of that service or program or activity being provided. So public entities are not required to take actions that would result in undue financial and administrative burden. But I think the next slide is important, because there is a difference between just purely refusing to make a reasonable accommodation versus not taking an action that is demonstrated to result in undue financial and administrative burden. So we really need to carefully consider the request and have appropriate documentation that demonstrates, if you're saying, no, we can't do that because of an undue financial or administrative burden, that is well documented, and there's reasons behind that, versus just telling somebody, nope, we're not doing it. And that's where I think you can get into sticky situations, or quote unquote in trouble, or have somebody sue because for just flat out saying we're not doing it and not having the documentation that shows or demonstrates that undue financial and administrative burden. So the next question that was posed to me was, how do we determine if we are equipped to serve students with disabilities in the classroom and behind the wheel? So, really overall, and you can go to the next slide, really overall, it's having an open dialogue with the student, with the parent, with other school staff or administration prior to the start of class, because this really helps you understand what the needs of the student are, being aware of the accommodations that may be needed for the student to really successfully access and participate in the class, knowing how and determining how those accommodations are going to be provided and when. And then this whole piece around consent that we'll get into a little bit more later, is important, but discussing with the parent, the student, or the special education teacher if you have consent. But really, it's so important to have the open dialogue and communication. And you may be asking, well, how do I know if a student has this disability? And that question is going to come up in just a minute. So before we go on, so just some examples here of some possible, accommodations or needs of a student who's in a class. So there may be a student who is deaf and hard of hearing, and they use what's called an FM system. So that's where the teacher or instructor might need to wear a microphone that is going to either be connected to what we call a sound field system. That's just a speaker in the classroom that amplifies the instructor's voice, and all students benefit from that. Or a student may have an FM system that goes directly into their hearing aids or cochlear implants in order to have better access to spoken information. You could have a student who is deaf or hard of hearing using an interpreter, a sign language interpreter. You might have a student who has dwarfism and is unable to reach the foot pedals, and so some extenders might be needed. A student who is visually impaired and needs or has low vision, and they may need large print materials or special accommodations while driving. And so those are all of the things, just a few examples of some things that it's, important to know what a student needs so that they can be provided appropriately. So if we go to the next slide, here's where we're really sort of talking about consent. And as I was, doing some research for the presentation back in April, I came across just a brief, if you will, around driving instructors having a legitimate interest in records. And while it is always best practice to gain written consent in order to review a student's record, this Family Policy Compliance Office letter, and I'm happy to provide that to Carl to get out to everyone, said or did the following. So FERPA, which is HIPAA is sort of the medical compliance, and FERPA is this educational compliance. And it generally prohibits a school, as I said, from disclosing a student's education record to third parties unless the parent provides consent. Okay. But in this letter, there are some exceptions to FERPA that allow school officials to obtain access to education records if they have a legitimate educational interest in the information. And so what this family policy compliance letter found in this case was that the driving instructor was, a third party, yes, but they determined that they were a school official and had legitimate educational interest to review the education record. Um, the parent was complaining that they didn't have consent to look, but then it was determined in this instance that they did have legitimate educational interest in order to provide the student with the education and needed to know the information to perform the professional duties. So I thought that was very interesting. But again, it is always best practice to gain that written consent, whether you are an employee of the school and may not be in special education, but you're instructing these students because we know driver's ed is not required for graduation. So or even as a third party, you have a contract or an MOA with the school district as a contract agency or company to provide driver's education um, and need to know this information again to perform your professional duties. Getting that consent or obtaining that consent would be important. So you can go to the next slide. And then this last question was, what questions are we allowed to ask and what information are we allowed to know in regards to a 504 or IEP document? And so on the next slide, in talking with my director, Dr. Carol Ann Hudgens, she's over special education for our state. This first bullet, or thinking about your enrollment form when students are saying yes, I'm in, or parents are I'm interested, I want my child to participate in driver's ed. This first bullet, no issues whatsoever. Do you require any accommodations per the Americans with Disabilities Act? We ask that question all the time when we are holding conferences or workshops because we need to know what people need. And so there's no issue whatsoever in our mind that you cannot ask this question on an enrollment form. We would suggest that you give 3 options. Yes, they can say, yes, I do require accommodations, and then have them explain what those accommodations are. They can say no, or they can prefer not to answer. And so all of those, they can choose to disclose or not. If they say no or prefer not to answer, then, that is their choice. And then they, how are you supposed to know they need anything? You don't have an obligation to provide them anything if they're not going to disclose that. And one of the things that we strive to do with students with disabilities is help them to be good advocates for themselves, and help parents be good advocates for their children too, and teach them that it's okay to advocate for your needs. And so by saying yes, they would be advocating for their needs. The second question, do you have an IEP or Section 504 plan? Yes.
Carrie, Carl again.
Yes.
Question here, if a student refuses to, well, actually, at this point, we don't have anything universally for all the districts to follow. Should we create a recommendation for the districts to follow? Should a student decide to, a lot of shoulds in there, if a student decides not to reveal the information or provide the information to the teacher, what, I don't want to say what obligation is it that the teacher has to, obviously, we're thinking of safety here, a student who has certain challenges or physical challenges that would present driving issues.
Sure. Yeah.
Does the teacher have the ability to reduce? And before I give you that question, the requirement is that there's no proficiency in driver education as far as behind the wheel of the classroom for that matter. There's no proficiency. Does the district or the school or the teacher have the ability to reduce the amount of access to the road based on their professional opinions?
That's a great question. I don't know if, I'm not an attorney. I sort of feel like that's potentially an attorney question, maybe. I don't know. I would sort of say, if somebody chooses not to disclose that they have a disability, right? And then, and they say no, or they prefer not to answer. And, the first day of the class, they come in and they're, let's just maybe say in a wheelchair. Um, and so your mind is already turning like, what am I going to do during the driving component? Like, you look back at the enrollment form, the student didn't answer, you didn't know until the first day they walked in that you're sort of looking at this physical disability. And so to me, probably after class, I may be making a phone call to, the principal, to the parent, and just sort of saying, hey, could we have a conversation about this? And just talk about, and, even with the student, I, on the enrollment form, they, chose not to disclose this information, but coming in on the first day, I'm, recognizing that there may be a need for some accommodations. Can we talk about that? And then as a group, sort of determining what may or may not be feasible to do. So it's just so much about that open dialogue. There's lots of disabilities that are obvious to the eye, and then there's lots of disabilities that are not obvious to the eye. Sort of those outward physical ones, sort of easy to tell, if you will, but lots of silent or invisible disabilities that may not be evident on the first day of class, the second day of class. But as you get into it, as soon as you suspect something or may think something is might require an accommodation, I would open those conversations. But as I asterisked there at the bottom, you always want to check with your legal counsel regarding the questions to ensure they're comfortable with them, and that you're following, what their guidance is. But we have no issue in terms of asking those questions on an enrollment form. Okay. And then the next slide, again, this legitimate educational interest. That may be something that if you are a third party contractor, you may want to put in your contract, or in your work with the district. And again, utilizing the support of your legal counsel or the district's legal counsel. And again, I can provide that letter, but if you have that worked out in the beginning, that may be very helpful. Again, it's always best practice to get parental consent, and you just want to document. If you're noticing something, write it down. Open those conversations, and ask, for help from the parent. If you're a third party, get to know your special education teachers, and in the school, and they can be very, very helpful to you in providing accommodations, how to do this, how to things to consider, those kinds of things. So very helpful resource there.
Gary, this is Devin Tanner. Can I ask a clarifying question?
Sure.
The private driving schools, do they have, so what you're saying is if they approach a special ed teacher of a specific student, that, the parent may have checked yes on the registration, that special ed instructor is by law allowed to give that information to a private driving school instructor?
So again, I think what you want to do is if a parent says, yes, my child needs an accommodation on the IEP or in the class, if you have that on your enrollment form, do you require an accommodation under the AEDA, or do you have a section, an IEP or section 504 plan, and they say yes, and what that is, then I would reach out to that parent immediately and just say, hey, thank you so much for putting that on there. And get their consent. Are you okay with me talking with the child's special education teacher to understand a little bit more about the accommodations and what help I need? And then if, that's always the best practice. Get that parental consent, and then, talking with that special education teacher, if you have the parent's consent, that shouldn't be a problem. Again, always having that open dialogue. You may, I don't know what the protocol is in the school. If the principal's going to say, I'd like you to come to me first about this or whatever. But just knowing your protocols and chains of command, but that parental consent still is that best practice, even if they say yes. Does that help, Devin?
Yes, thank you so much.
Yep. And then the last slide really was just some resources that I found on the internet that were very helpful. Some things that I was actually thinking about this morning, because Carl said, some people might have some questions about funding because, students, certain disabilities, in thinking about this undue hardship or financial burden, it can be very, very expensive. And I think I was talking with one driver ed instructor that they said they spent $3,000 getting special driving instruction for a student with a visual impairment. And so I understand that funding sources are limited, and that kind of thing. But there are some things I was thinking about this morning. So there's a couple of sororities where their mission is around students with disabilities, specifically Delta Zeta. Their focus or mission is with students who are deaf and hard of hearing. Delta Gamma, their mission is with students with visual impairments. And so if you're seeing a student that has a need and the school system, doesn't have the ability to provide $3,000 to get special driving through driver rehabilitation services, then consider, try to exhaust some different avenues before we just say no, right? And so they may be very willing to fund part or all, of this for a particular student. And I'm happy to add those on here. So again, it was Delta Zeta for deaf and hard of hearing and Delta Gamma for vision impairment. And there may be other sororities or fraternities that do the same thing. The Lions Club does a lot around vision. The Sertoma Club does a lot around deaf and hard of hearing. Because those are my areas, I just know specifically about those two, but we could also look in for some other disability areas and some organizations that may have funding resources to help these students, participate. So I think that is all that I had. And I know I've probably taken more time than I should have to let these other people have an opportunity, but thanks for your time and attention. And I'm always available for questions later too. So thanks.
Sherry, are you gonna be able to stay around in the meeting?
Oh yeah, yes, I'm gonna be here through the meeting. I have another meeting at 1, but I'll be here through this meeting, yes.
Okay, because I've got some questions because we've got two other
Yep.
groups of students that we want to cover, and I was wondering, we're looking at teacher training and we're looking at the legalities of the school unit that's providing the education, and you've got charter schools who's about to come up, and then you've got the non-public education that will be presenting it as well. So if you could, I thank you for hanging around. to
Oh, yeah,
talk with
sure.
us.
Yep, I'll be here.
Very quickly, Dr. Brandy Gill is here at the table. She is she's a member of the Driver Advisory Committee. And with her is her great leader, Ms. Ashley B. Carroll, and I'll let Brandy introduce her.
Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Brandy Gill. I work with Office of Charter Schools, and this is my lovely Executive Director, Ashley Vaquero. She's our fearless leader, and she's going to share some great information and data around driver's education and charter schools to help us understand our special population. So I'm going to turn it over to Ashley.
All right. Hopefully everyone online can hear me. I have a pretty loud voice usually. So Carl asked me to share some data with you on the state of charter schools in the North Carolina, where we're currently looking at, and some information from our charter schools that are serving high schoolers and driver's ed students. So if we I'm going to go ahead and start, and then when we get the slides up, that's fine. If we look at the last school year, charter school enrollment was over 10% of the state population. So we've seen incredible growth over the last couple of years. We had over 145,000 students enrolled in charter schools for the last academic year. And that represented over 10% of public school enrollment in the state. This next graph here shows you the growth of charter schools, so that the star represents where the General Assembly removed the cap on charter schools. There used to be a cap. It was capped at 100. So you can see we kind of had steady growth during the early 2000s. And then since the lifting of that cap, we have seen charter schools more than double. So currently, actually, this was for 2022. This year we have 210 operating, and two of those are, well, one is definitely closing, possibly another one. So we'll probably see about the same number next year.
Why are they closing?
One is closing for non-renewal based on academics, and then the other is they're appealing, but they've been recommended for closure based on financial problems. The next slide. So if we look, there's been pretty steady growth, although certainly a lot of growth since the lifting of the cap. But what we're really seeing is significant growth in terms of enrollment. So this is, and I apologize for the numbers, it got a little wonky once I put it into Google. But looking from 2019 to 2023, so basically kind of like the pandemic years, we've seen 25% growth in a number of kids. So we're not seeing the number of schools grow quite as quickly as we were seeing in the early, like around 2011 after the cap, but we're seeing a huge increase in the number of enrolled students. I think it was, there was a national survey maybe a year ago, and I think we had it was the fifth. We had the fifth highest growth of charter school enrollment in the nation. So a ton of growth, especially since the pandemic. What I'm predicting is that we are going to see fewer new schools, and instead we're going to just see like a greater increase in the number of students, because what we see is that we have a lot of our most like popular schools, the schools that are doing really well, that have really long wait lists. This current year, schools reported wait list over 85,000 kids across the state. But some of these schools have, over 1,000 kids on their wait list. And if you go to the next slide.
What do you attribute the success to those charter schools versus the?
Yeah, I think, well, definitely the ones with the really strong wait list are schools that have been operating for a while. So they've got that, like, they've got that foundation, they've got the staffing, they have the program, it's usually the first couple of years of a charter school that are the most unstable. And so that is definitely something we see. And then perhaps just maybe, especially in some of our like metro areas, like Charlotte Meck and Wake County, I think we're seeing more parents that are interested in an alternative to the district. Or maybe they can't get into the magnet school that they're interested in, right? Because that also runs on a lottery system. So I think that has something to do with it.
don't want to mess up your presentation flow, but if you've got this somewhere in your presentation, the ADM projections
Mhm.
and the source of the students, are these students transferring or are they just new kids, period, who are coming in with a mass number of students who are people who are,
Like transferring from other schools?
yes.
Yeah, a lot of them are, I mean, obviously, we get, the charter schools have their new kindergartners that enter every year. But we see, and certainly that's probably the majority of the schools get their new kids like in the younger, the more elementary age ages, especially if it's like a K-8 or K-12. But we also see a lot of transferring. And you see parents that move from charter to charter, that move from homeschool to charter, that move from private to, there definitely are some parents that tend to they're trying to find the right fit.
You all track that?
No, we don't have like we don't have specific data on that. Yeah.
How,
Like
how,
the specific numbers on
let me
that.
ask you, how does charter schools compare to public schools as far as growth with kids on the average?
Oh, that's an interesting question.
Because I know in our county, they did a little survey and the charter schools were below the public school.
Mhm.
But I mean, I don't know,
Yeah,
because you can make statistics ever how you want to make statistics too. I was just curious. I mean, is there an
Yeah.
average compared with the charter schools growth?
well, it
to-
really depends on where you're looking at in the state. I will say that I think the school business does like a student enrollment, like ADM presentation each year to the state board. And I think certainly like it's these years we saw in that previous graph, like the 2019 to the current year, those like pandemic years, most of the district schools saw decreases in the number of enrollments, and charter schools, I think every grade level except for one saw.
I'm talking about academic growth. Is there any
Ah.
statistics on academic growth
Yeah.
comparison? I mean, I know that
Yeah.
compare, I mean, is charters better? And I guess on the average, I know every county is district.
Yeah.
Every county is different, but I was just curious.
Yeah, there's actually, so I do the annual report to the state board every year, and it's I just presented last month, and they will review and approve it this upcoming meeting. But it really depends on the county, but in general, we're seeing very similar. Like the number of schools, for example, that like score like ABC, or the number that are low performing, the percentages are remarkably like similar. So in that annual report, I don't have that with me, but there is a chart of like all of the like the low performing charters, low performing districts, and then the percentages are broken out.
So it stays pretty much the same.
It's
That's
pretty
what you're saying.
similar. Yeah, but it really would depend on like the specific school in the county. And then the other thing is my Future NC. They have their website has like county profiles, so you can actually, I think it's by region, but you can go into your state board region and look up, and it will give you all the demographics, all the academics on the public schools and the traditionals and the charter schools. Yeah. So we are seeing certainly like slower growth in the number of schools opening. It's becoming much harder to open a new school, but we are seeing increased enrollment. And now that the General Assembly has gotten rid of the enrollment cap, there used to be an enrollment cap, I would suspect that we might see greater enrollment. That remains to be seen. And then we are hearing more interest in rural areas from like local leaders, from community members that are interested in bringing charter schools to their rural counties. But it just is we're seeing slow growth, right? It's not easy to open a charter school. You have to have a board that wants to in that area. Finding a facility is our number one challenge now. So it's just, although we hear a lot of interest, it's a very slow. We're not seeing much growth there. For this current year, we had 7 new schools open. And then we have only 2 scheduled to open this upcoming fall. So this might be certainly since I've been here for 6 years, the lowest like opening number that we've had. And why that's happened is a lot of them have delayed their opening. So that's why you see that right now we've got, and I think it might be even higher now, around 16 that are scheduled to open in 2025. If they don't either delay or we get people that just give up, and we call that withdrawal. But very few schools are, like new schools are opening. And then we received 15 new applications and 8 of those were approved, and those go into that 2025 opening cohort. So we do get a lot of questions about like demographics. So you can see this is the current, or the last year's ethnicity and racial data. And really over the last couple of years, we've seen the same sort of thing where charters are getting closer to mirroring what we see in the traditional schools, with the exception of the Hispanic students. The traditional district schools are just seeing a huge growth in the number of Hispanic students and English learners or multilingual students that they're enrolling, and that growth is slower in the charter schools. But in terms of Asians, Black students, 2 or more races, and white students, there are more enrolling in charter schools. Okay, so our office, with the help of Dr. Gill, put out a survey for our charter schools to try to get some kind of input on driver's ed, because I don't usually work in this space. And I do like to really kind of get input about what they're seeing. So the majority of the input, and of course, we're only talking a much smaller percentage of schools than like traditional schools, because not all of our charters serve high schoolers. But most of them either rely on private companies. Many say they refer to local LEA programs. That's the most frequently reported. And then some have an internal program. That's probably pretty few. More of them indicated interest in doing that, but just lacking the resources to do it.
When you say internal, what do you?
Like they might have someone that's like certified to teach driver's ed, but they don't have maybe the resources to like do the like full, like, now that I know what BTW means, like the whole shebang.
So they've got someone on staff who has a driver education certification, but you don't have a vehicle.
Right, they might not have, right, exactly, or like the funds for like the insurance that's needed, and just kind of the administrative type of cost. Some of the barriers they noted and counted were the days and times available through that local LEA. So sometimes trying to make that work with whatever the schedule is at the charter school. A lot of it's definitely more popular for our high school students in charter schools to have like a unique sort of schedule. Like maybe they're doing a lot of like CTE or community dual enrollment. So trying to link up those schedules can be hard. Some of them reported like just having outdated materials or like lack of funding to do like a program at the school campus. They reported issues for families unable to pay for private companies, so they might be interested, but like the parents are unable to afford that. Several of them reported that they just have more kids that are interested and eligible, but like there's a wait list in the local district, which I've heard is probably the case for the traditional schools too. And then we did have reports of like sharing spots. I don't know a lot about that, but it sounds like maybe there's like multiple groups trying to get into like their local driver's ed program, and it's just very hard to like, it causes kind of a backup, a wait list for the kids. And then some of our smaller rural counties spoke about like geographic barriers. So there might be like one driving school within like a very large, mileage range, and it's just hard to get kids in. And then finally, what they kind of wants, I guess I would say, is when I was asking for kind of like, what are your requests? Funding, obviously. So especially for schools that are interested in doing like a on-campus driver's ed program. And again, they said, lack of funding, training, or staff, and then increased access for families with limited resources. So those were kind of the input, and it is really helpful for our office to like get this sort of input. We've really tried to advocate for like transportation, the transportation grant for our charter schools, because a lot of them want to have like a full busing program and find it very hard, like financially, or the same type of staffing issues that the districts encounter. So just having this data helps us kind of bring that information to the General Assembly, and that's how we've had the transportation grant for charter schools the last couple of years. So, any questions?
I have tons of questions, but I know the answers to them, but I want to hear you say these publicly. The challenges that you have, DPI is aware of that. Obviously, you being in the building and having close access to you all, and obviously just having some common sense. What would the funding piece? We're actually in uncharted territory with this program. Obviously, when driver education was created in 1927, this was not even a thought process. Now it is, because the way, according to statute, we serve all public, charter, private, home, federal school students. They're all the same to us. To DPI, they're all the same. So how do we best train, yeah, how do we best provide services to all the students is what we're focused on. And we had made some tremendous strides in that direction. Obviously, the cutting of our administrative funds cut all of that. We don't know what we can do going forward. What does this look like for charter school students? Because you're saying that you've got a number of schools that are opening up in rural areas. There are 56 counties in North Carolina that do not have commercial driving schools. If the public school program goes away, what does that do to the students in those areas and the crash rates in those areas? Economics or commerce, what does that mean for those areas? It's something that we need to take a look at. And like I said, we're kind of in uncharted territory. I said there was a question here, but it's not really.
A rhetorical question.
We're kind of in uncharted territory, and so how do we best provide services to all students, regardless of where they're from, where they live?
I mean, I would think that a huge part of this is like the kind of building those relationships in those communities so that, there's definitely, I feel like charters could be a really strong voice for, especially in the General Assembly, for requests and for making, I'm definitely a proponent of, if you have a want, like bring it to their attention, because otherwise how are they to know, right?
Yeah.
And definitely several charter schools have spoken up so highly of their district partners in these type of programs. So I personally would love to see more like districts and charter schools come together for advocate for things that they both need that are serving kids, right? This isn't like a charter versus district situation. You're both serving kids. We all want drivers on the road that are safe and that know what they're doing. So I would definitely say kind of building those bridges so that they understand more about how the programs work at the district level and what is needed for, like, I had no idea until today that the funding had been cut. So the administrative funding you're talking about. So, I think a lot of that is just communicating, right? Like that messaging and building those relationships so that schools and the people that are providing for students can advocate for the funding that is needed, because a lot of schools, every school that talks to us about driver's ed wants to do more to provide programming for driver's ed, whether it's like greater access or greater like flexibility in when the programming is happening, and just lack the resources to do so.
Does anyone else have any questions? What I'd like to do is can you stay around for a little bit?
I can stay for a little, yep.
Okay,
Yeah.
12 o'clock.
Okay.
All right. So
Most charter schools we do in Wayne County, they take it when we have it. I mean, we don't have any issues with charter schools.
Yeah.
We, like you said, we work together. I send stuff out to them. They come and take our class just like everybody else. So I didn't know is it different in different
It's
counties?
definitely different in different counties.
it is definitely different. Yes, I could tell you stories. If we could pause this conversation and come back to it, we've got one more presenter, Bobby Dixon, with the Division of Non-Public Education. Mr. Dixon is the director over there, and we talk quite frequently, actually. I'm not sure exactly where he is. I think he's across the street now.
I have a couple of buildings over, yes, sir.
Couple goes over. And unfortunately, he couldn't be with us here personally in the building, but he is going to present remotely for us. And Mr. Dixon, I'm sure you heard some of the conversation here, and I'm going to draw that back together once you're completed and then your presentation.
That's fine. Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. I am Bobby Dixon. I am 16 months into the Director of Non-Public Education. I joined the Department of Administration with 26 years of public school experience as a teacher and as a principal. So it's been quite an eye-opening experience for me in this particular position. So non-public education is quite different from what I have had experienced previously in public school. We as a department, or a division under the Department of Administration, we register and monitor, we limited monitoring of private schools and homeschools. We currently have over 95,000 homeschools and about 880 private schools. Those numbers fluctuate quite a bit. We've been trying to clean up our data for a couple of years, and I'll explain to you why it's a challenge to clean up the data. You want to go to the next slide, Cindy. So homeschools, as I said earlier, we register about right now currently 96,000 homeschools in the state. Statutory requirements for those homeschools: they must be a North Carolina resident. They must provide proof of high school completion or equivalency. They maintain all homeschool records within the homeschool office, and they must also administer an annually standardized test each academic year, and they must maintain those records. They do not send those records to us. If you want to go to the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about private schools, just some of the statutory requirements. Currently we have 878. I'm right now finalizing our end of year data. We have 878 private schools registered in the state. And in order for you to register with our division, private school, you must first provide fire and sanitation inspections that are required of the physical location. Online private schools are currently not recognized by our division, and I can answer questions about that later when I get into DECs. As a private school, you are to maintain all school records within the school office, as well as administer an annually standardized test each academic year, and they must cover the subjects of grammar, language, writing, math, and that's it. Spelling, did I say spelling? Okay. And then you are subject as a private school to inspection visits by our division. By the way, our division is only 9 members, and I have 2 of us that visit the 878 private schools, so it's impossible to get an annual visit to every private school every year. But when we go and inspect their records, make sure they're keeping enrollment, make sure they're following what they're supposed to be following. Go to the next slide. So the instructional programs that are selected by non-public schools are totally their choice. We don't monitor any of the curriculum that's being taught in private schools nor in homeschools. It is totally up to the school itself to select the curriculum method that they choose, but they must make sure they are teaching English, grammar, reading, spelling, and mathematics, as well as competencies in the verbal and quantitative areas. So it's totally their choice, homeschools and private schools. We have a lot of homeschools who practice unschooling, and I'm not even going to get into that right now, but it is their choice to do so. Go to the next slide. This is going to be quick. So driver's eligibility certificates, that has been the thing for me as a former high school principal who issued these driver's eligibility certificates. It's kind of different here in the Department of Division of Non-Public Education. We do administer or issue the driver's eligibility certificates to private schools as well as homeschools. But it's done a little differently, and I'll explain a little bit more about that Go to the next slide, do this quickly. Okay, so for private schools, if you're registered with North Carolina, as you should be, you may go onto your online portal and request as many DECs as you need. We send blank DECs, courtesy of DPI, to those private schools, and they use their school seal to authorize the DEC and also provide proof that the child is making academic progress or adequate academic progress. Homeschools are a little differently. When homeschool chief administrator can go on to their online portal as well, and they can request a DEC through the portal. The only issue is they can only request one. If they have twins or multiple students, they have to call our office so that we can add an additional one to them. Now, they are responsible for signing that DEC as the chief administrator when they go to the DMV. And we always encourage them, do not sign and date until you know it's time to go to the DMV. Because we get a lot of phone calls about, well, mine's expired, I need some more. Got one today. Online private schools. We've been deemed the agency for the state to issue DECs to online private schools, which creates a little issue for us, but we do the best we can. And since they're not registered with us, and we don't have any really access to any of them, and they all use various online models, we will send them a DEC, but they have to provide us with proof of enrollment for at least 4 months. And we do have students who leave their public schools because they're not doing well academically, and they go to Penn Foster, and then they want a DEC. We don't do that. We do require at least 4 months enrollment in that online private school, just as we do with any of the schools, homeschools or private schools. You've got to be able to provide proof of enrollment for at least 4 months. You can't leave a public school and go open a homeschool and then ask for a DEC. You got to be enrolled with us for at least 4 months. So the online private school, the same thing. We ask for proof of adequate academic progress, the contact information, student's name and birth date. And then once we have all of that, we will mail them and stamp them with our seal and send them DEC. We go to the next slide. Yeah. This just shows a number of private schools. I went back to 2019-20, the beginning of the dreaded COVID. You can see how our numbers have increased. This is private schools. If you'll see the 1920 school year, we were at about 750 private schools. And you can see the growth of private schools through the next 4 years. Why? Don't know. Can't tell you why. We can speculate all day long, but I can't tell you why the increase in private schools has happened. We don't collect that data. We don't know why they open their homeschool or private schools. They just open the private schools. And then homeschools, if you go to the next slide. You can see the orange there. That was 2021. That was post-COVID. We were over 112,000 homeschools registered in North Carolina. So since then, we have dropped back down to about 96,000. And that came with the General Assembly giving our division some money to help clean up the data. We had lots of homeschools that opened and never closed. We don't have the statutory authority to close a homeschool. They're required to close their homeschools once they're done, and they don't always do that. So it did take a huge data cleanup to fix that. And so we're right at about 96,000. Are we 100%? No. The data we present is only as good as what they give us. We don't have a central mainframe of collection of data other than our online portal. And if they don't go into the online portal to update their annual data, we don't have it. That's what we've got. Next slide. Any questions for me? I think I saw a question in a chat. I thought I did.
Thanks, Ms. Dixon. And by the way, Dr. Leonard was in a traffic jam. She is now in the room. So pardon me for still driving the bus.
That's quite okay. Driving a bus.
Mr. Dixon, you and I have had a number of conversations. I do have a series of questions I want to ask you, and then we want to try to bring the other populations of students back into the conversation, as Dr. Leonard will probably make a recommendation after we have this discussion. A couple of questions here regarding registration. Do they have to prove that they're attending a private school? How, and I guess that kind of goes to the contractors and coordinators that are in the room. Do you all require some kind of proof that they are a private school student? I'll take that as a no. The next question is how do you, as far as the ADM, is there a way to receive or get a good count or projection or an estimate? Or do you have accurate numbers of the students that are rising ninth graders in private schools?
In private schools, we can give you a number. Is it as accurate as it needs to be? Hard to say. You and I've had this discussion recently. As long as private schools are supposed to, and none of this is statutory, they are supposed to complete an annual report every year. And when they complete that annual report, they're supposed to give us accurate data. And the demographics that we collect in non-public school are only by age, grade, and gender. And homeschools, it's just age and gender. Private schools, it's grade and gender. So I can pull a report from your private schools in any county that you need and give you an estimate of how many, or tell you how many eighth graders were registered in that county or registered in that state. Is it 100% accurate? No, unless they've completed an annual report. And right now, of the 878 schools we have about 125 who've not completed annual reports, which was a huge jump over the previous years. We have really worked hard this year to make sure that we are communicating with our private schools and our home schools and making sure they're updating their data so that because we're statutorily required by the General Assembly to report out this data. But sometimes this data gets reported, well, all the time the data gets reported and it's not accurate. And so we're really working on trying to improve that. But that's a challenge. If I can't get my 96,000 homeschools to update their data, it's a challenge with only 9 staff members.
What about homeschool? Are you able to determine the number of rising ninth graders, 14, 15-year-olds?
I can, but the data is only as good as the homeschools provide.
So it's really an estimate.
It's all an estimate, yes, sir.
At what time of the year do you receive that information?
That information for homeschools is ongoing every day. We close our homeschool notice of intent window May 1st, and it's closed until July 10th. So there are no new homeschools being opened at this time. And so when they open a homeschool, they're supposed to report their attendance or their enrollment. But the problem with that is if I open my homeschool in 24 and I report my enrollment and the age and gender of my child, but then 25, 26, 27, I don't update it. That's what we have. And there's no monitoring or regulation or statutory requirement for you to update. The only statutory requirement is for you to keep your data on file in your home office. And we don't go inspect home schools. We do a record review with them. We do an online record review randomly, and they usually present, well, they voluntarily present their data or their records to us.
I frequently tell people that I'm like this ranch hand that was hired to get all the cattle back in the fence and then go back and build a fence.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that we have here is a new factor in the driver education is driver eligibility. Driver eligibility is like a distant cousin who came to visit one day and didn't go home.
Mm-hmm.
It has nothing to do with driver education. So let's call that out for just a second. But I'm going to talk about the same kids. The kids who are taking online private schools, do they factor in, or do they register with you prior to? Are they homeschooled? Or are they considered online private schools?
So some of them are homeschooled, and when we get those phone calls, we encourage them to register with us as a homeschool. That way we have them registered with us. Many of them choose not to. And, we always throw out the compulsory education law. If they're ages 7 to 15, they must be enrolled in the school. And since currently North Carolina doesn't necessarily officially recognize through our division online private schools, they really are on their own with that. So we do encourage as much as we can for them to register with us as a homeschool, because they can choose whatever instructional delivery they want to. And if it's Penn Foster or whomever, it's fine.
I'm asking these questions because these are questions that are kind of recurring frequently, occurring frequently, and from our district leaders, because this is the planning allotment time of the year.
Right.
Regarding ADM counts, as far as charter school, and bring them back into the mix here. You all receive an accurate account or ADM?
It comes through here, school business, because that's how they're funded, based on their ADM.
And so our budget department has access to the ADM and the rising ninth graders. And when is that updated?
Well, they do a monthly PMR, what is it, Principal's Monthly Report. So monthly, it's usually posted on the school finance website. Yeah.
The reason that I'm asking this question is because I know that the General Assembly requires a report from our agency regarding funding. And that report is due so early that we have to estimate the number of students that are going to be enrolled in the ninth grade driver education, or in driver 14.5. So there's no way for us to provide a accurate planning allotment. The planning allotments are out right now, but we're asking the districts, I don't want to say disregard them, but it's like it's a planning allotment. It's not the allotment for the year. There's going to be several more adjustments throughout the year, and that's the reason I ask those questions. But as far as the populations of students, they all have different but very similar requirements. Obviously, the one thing that keeps popping in my mind here through all three of your presentations is there's still a student that requires a highly trained teacher to provide education. And that's what this committee's responsibility is. How do we best do that for the students? How do we best do that? And as you can imagine, we're sitting here, we're peeling back the onion, and this gets very, very deep. Funding is obviously an issue. The number of teachers that we have is obviously an issue. And a standardized curriculum is needed. Deb, how many teachers do you have?
110.
That means it's a possibility that we could have 110 different curriculums in that one school district. Obviously, I know you don't, but
yes,
but there are variations. But we all need to have the same goal in mind, and because all the kids are going to operate a vehicle on the same roads with all of us, the same road. So how do we best do that? How do we best do that? And we're not going to be able to answer that question right now in this room, but I bet Dr. Leonard has an idea of how we could begin to discuss this. I would say that this is probably something that needs to be divided up and discussed, where we could bring in leaders from the local school districts to have a voice at the table. And how do we best fix the issues that we have? Education obviously is the primary. And what I've seen for the last 30 years is administration has driven education instead of education driving administration. So our program right now is set up for administration. It's not set up for education, which causes the problem for the students in the off-campus, off-PSU campuses, charter schools, private schools, and the homeschool kids. even some of the on-campus kids struggle there to get them in because of their lifestyles and their participating in sports and all kinds of things. How do we best do this going forward? We had a situation, we had a digitized program that could have gone a long way to eliminate that. But how do we do that in a post DPI administrative funding era? How do we best do that?
Carl, one of the things I'd like to add is that perhaps one of the best things we can do is all recognize that driver education is indeed education. I think it's quite possible over the decades, we have taken for granted that driver education is there, it's in the backdrop, we know how it happens, and it seems to be effective. But I think emerging this topic to the forefront as a reminder that traffic safety education is more important than ever. The technologies in traffic, the roadways and the road drivers, it is imperative that our young drivers understand the importance of mastering good driving skills, understanding roadways, understanding safe maneuvers. You're the experts at the table. I'm somewhat of a newcomer to this environment as well, but I'm clearly a champion of what you do and why you do it. I think emerging the conversation that this is education and that, well, I've never known a student, I don't say this lightly by any means, to experience loss of life over failing a math test, although it feels that way. It felt that way to me. We have to recognize this has a very serious impact ultimately on the lives, livelihoods, and future of our students. So we want to, I think, re-emerge the conversation around how critical driver education, traffic safety education is to anyone, certainly our drivers. So acknowledging it as part of the sound basic education, which all students in our state are entitled.
Part of the responsibilities of the committee is to advocate for the program. And Dr. Harvey and myself, Ashley, Dr. Gill, we can't lobby the legislators, but the board can, or this committee can. That's not the non, and Kevin can't either. The non.
Other words would be, we're not lobbying anyone. We're about informing,
Right.
giving factual information so that our elected officials can make the most informed decisions possible. I know that the charter school team is very well aware of the importance of giving accurate, meaningful data, even the anecdotal stories behind those data to make them come alive is imperative as well as help in order to keep those who are decision makers ultimately well informed of what the needs are.
And I'll add on to what's being said. Our office and my life, it deals with the data that comes from the crashes and injuries that we pull from departmental agencies, whether they be law enforcement or hospitals. And when we get that data and we see the magnitude of increasing, everybody wants to blame COVID. And granted, that was one of the variables, certainly, for our increase. But this driving behavior that people are now attuned to or feel empowered to drive without any rules or any regulation because they're never going to get in a crash. And our crashes they may not be increasing to the level of what some might think, but they're more horrific crashes because the speeds are so much increase. And so when you see that, and I see it every day, and as a emergency responder and going out to give back to the community, I see that even more impactful. But those people that are sitting sometimes behind the table don't quite get the grasp of that. You can see numbers, and you said that a mouthful earlier. You can use those stats any way you want to provide your personal agenda. And when we see the folks that are impacted by this, not only the people that are killed in the crashes are injured and then become maybe award of the state, for example, or people that are responding to that and then have mental issues afterwards because they have post-traumatic stress because of it. So it is a combination of a lot of things. And I think what we as a group here in this council need to look at different groups across the board. Granted, we can go before the school board, we can go before those that are legislators, but they're not going to feel it unless we bring to them attention on how it's going to affect them. If it doesn't affect, I used to say all the time when I wrote grants for years, if I could find one county commissioner that had had a heart attack on my group, I could get any kind of defibrillation unit. I could get any kind of rescue squad unit throughout. And I worked that. Might sound like a little unorthodox way, but it works. And I can find a county commissioner that had his house broken into. Sheriff's office they're loving it. If they did anything, then all of a sudden we got new cars, we got all kinds of equipment, and the same way with anything. So sometimes you need to know who your players are. You need to understand who the folks that are driving the education.
Right, fun.
Yes. To find out what it is that they're thinking about and why it is that they decide they don't want to fund certain avenues. So maybe we do need to do a little bit of homework to our target group and who we're trying to get to come to our side.
Simply because of DPI being staffed to this committee, if I could make the recommendation that we put together a focus group, and I'm thinking of a big whiteboard where you just put all of the issues or challenges there. Our former project manager used to call them brain dumps. We can put all of them there and then start to peel that out, and then focus or try to figure out a direction to go. The biggest concern that we have right now is that there is a hourglass that's running out. And my professional opinion is that we've got districts that have backlogs. I had the opportunity to listen in on the Wake County Board of Education meeting earlier last week. Hats off to you all for the efforts that you all are making to reduce the backlogs. And that I was very impressed with the level of understanding of how the technicalities and the nuances of the program by your upper leadership staff in there. I was very impressed with that. The other thing was, the most important thing I heard is that you all consider your contractor as a partner in driver education as opposed to checking the box and allowing them to operate totally autonomously from the district. I appreciate that. The thing what I'm concerned with is that right now backlogs are not a widespread issue. The larger districts respond or decrease their backlog slower. Some of your backlog, Kevin, I'm picking on you. Some of your backlog actually was before the pandemic.
Correct.
You were still fighting that from the previous backlog, which was in 2016 when the program shut down for 4 months.
We pre-pandemic, we had a wait between classroom and behind the wheel of anywhere from 6 to 10 weeks or 8 to 12 weeks,
Right.
which to the parents was way more reasonable than what we've got right now. So we didn't have the parent concern complaints that we had, even though we had a backlog and a wait time between classroom and behind the wheel. It wasn't necessarily an issue for most parents.
Yeah. My biggest concern is can this program survive another variable at this time with no source or I would say a limited source of new teachers coming into the fold.
What's the status on getting the DPI, where y'all were teaching it back? I mean, I know, you know,
The
is
step
it
program-
optimistic?
The STEP program, which was kind of the conversation that we had earlier in the year, was we were cautiously
Right,
optimistic.
Right.
And that, but since then, that seems to have cooled. We haven't heard anything. We don't know. I did forget to tell you this. DPI has exhausted all of their abilities, avenues to advocate for restoring that. All left up to
So local
the
voices.
local
have to
voices.
hear
The
it.
local voices have to do that. The local voices have to do that. I was amazed that there was a lot of, just like Ashley, there's a lot of folks that did not know that that was taken out of the budget. So that's where we are. If there's not a technical correction now, then the long session starts in January. We could have trained almost 300 teachers in that time period because we had a partnership with the districts. We could have had 3 cohorts, 3 different teachers teaching, 75 teachers per cohort. So I don't know if we fall that far behind, even farther behind than where we were, then what's the recovery? My biggest fear is that something may be decided, such as the reducing of the graduated license program, which was working, the reduction of the program itself, because or do you eliminate driver education at all before 18?
Before that, DMV was the only one was teaching the classes at one time anyway, for years. Because I know East Carolina Appalachian,
That was in 2015.
they closed theirs.
2015.
And
And I
then,
think you hit on something that's really important. I think there may, quite possible, there is a presumption that those higher education programs still do the driver training just described.
I know they,
Phased out.
yeah.
Some may still think it's in existence.
I've been in North Carolina for 11 years now, and in 11 years, I'll just speak for Wake County. We're one of the fastest growing counties in the country, and driver's ed has had to grow with that population growth, and so has the amount of instructors who are certified to teach driver education. Well, 11 years ago, we were weary because we had an aging population. We had so many of our driver ed instructors who were getting to retirement age and getting older that we were like, okay, what are we going to do when all of this happens and 30% of our state instructors retire all at once? The STEP program in its infancy was born from that idea, and it has happened. But we don't have, so as the DMV, they don't have the means to teach a whole lot. I think they do 2 classes a year of 15 instructors each. There's a few driving schools that are certified to teach that program as well, but most of the state has nowhere else to draw from drive instructors. So that's the issue with losing the STEP program.
Being that time has run out, if I could renew my recommendation to the committee for a motion to the floor to create a focus group subcommittee. I guess it would be an administrative subcommittee that we could use, and then and have a meeting to discuss and bring all these issues to the floor, and then start calling out that direction. In the meantime, that's the motion. In the meantime, maybe I should wait
Let's
for
do
you to
that.
do that.
Yeah. All right, so there's a motion on the floor. Do I hear an acceptance?
I'll second the motion.
Well, I think the motion would need to come from the committee. I'm just.
Okay, this is Devin Tanner. I'll make a motion to go ahead and form a, are you calling it a subcommittee, Carl?
We have,
A focus group?
we have.
Okay, to put together a focus group to get all of these challenges out in the open on a board and start discussing them, and how, as Carl mentioned in a post administrative world here for North Carolina driver ed, how we can help to fix these problems.
Do I have a second?
I'll second it. Craig as well.
All right,
All right.
all in favor?
Such-
Aye.
Opposed?
Yeah. Well,
So,
Dr. Leonard?
first of all, I thank each one of the speakers today and their wealth of information. Looking forward to sharing. I hope that we can take PowerPoint presentations and forward those to Carl and get those out to everybody. I know that there was a lot of good information, many things I jotted down personally that I think will be able to kind of, I guess, parallel with some of our information that we do in our shop. Thank all of you for attending. There is one thing I do want to mention. Rail Safety Week is coming up September 23rd through the 29th. And that is important because we are continuing to have a lot of pedestrians killed on our rail. Folks driving over our rail with the gates down, thinking that they can get there before the train gets to them. And our numbers are escalating. So as chair of the Operation Lifesaver program for North Carolina, we're now combining and doing a number of campaigns. So that's one of which we'll be doing. And we ask driving instructors to focus on that during that week, every day, obviously when they're training, but particular on that week. And hopefully they can emphasize some real safety information in the driver's handbook. There's the blue informational sign. There's also information that talks about opportunities, to slow down and be prepared to stop. Whatever that educational piece is, even if it's going out and showing them what a railroad looks like. It's amazing. Some don't have a clue the difference between the different stops. And having a brother in CSX for 42 years, I promise you, we know more than we want to know about the railroad. But knowing that and having that information for new drivers, I think is imperative. And so we thank you all very much for helping spread that word. Was there any other new business? Anybody else had anything they wanted to add before we close up?
I just want to thank again the providers, the speakers here today, Sherry Van Elsen, following in Dr. Carol's footsteps in providing all the great information that you do, and the charter school, Dr. Gill and Ashley, regarding the charter schools going forward. You can see here there's a lot of moving parts, and we have a staff of one. I'm going to do my best to keep everybody in the loop of what's going on, and then we'll get that information out together, and then we'll be over that.
And one of the things I wanted to add in one of the ideas that Carl had in talking is to have these kind of presentations at our board meetings so that you can get a little bit more insight about different things. And I think maybe if not this next meeting, one in the future through Governor's Highway Safety. I know you've heard about stats, but I think maybe some real life information about how imperative driving behavior has become, or the lack of has become, would be important for y'all to hear. Okay, well, with that, we will take a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Thank you. And second, hearing none. Welcome. Yes. Be safe traveling back home.
Thank you all.
Don't get that much traffic. I hope you don't get much traffic coming back.